Hello and welcome to this Falling Walls Breakthrough Conversation. This is a chance for us to bring scientists and researchers, science entrepreneurs and innovators closer to you out there. Our digital but very human audience, I do hope. For this session, we've got David Stark with us. He's a professor of sociology and social sciences at both Columbia and Warwick Universities, and an expert in networks of cognition in markets and teams. I do fear that somebody's played a nasty trick on me, because I'm going to have to sustain a conversation about that for the next 20-odd minutes. I'm Zulfikar Rabbani, a senior science editor at DW, that's Deutsche Welle, Germany's international broadcaster. But that's enough about me. Now, we'll have a brief chat, and then it's over to you to raise your hands in Zoom, I'm sure you're quite acquainted with that. You raise your hands, ask a question, ask questions, I should say. And what will happen is that when you do raise your hand, you'll be spotlighted and you'll be unmuted when it's ready for you to ask the question. You can ask your question. It'll be audio only. But you should know this will be recorded and it will be available later on as well. So that's a good thing. If you've got a follow-on question, just raise your hand again. If you've got any problems, technical issues, just write a quick message in the chat and our support team will help you out there. So I think that's basically it. That's all I've got to tell you out there. So get your questions ready. Thank you very much. David Stark, welcome to this Falling Walls Breakthrough Conversation. It's good to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Now, as I said, you are an expert in networks of cognition. Can you, in a word, in a line, sum that up for us? What are we talking about?
Well, people generally tend to think about cognition as something that happens up in people's heads. And of course it does, but the work that I do explores how their cognition is also distributed in the way in which society or groups or teams are organized. So we do experiments, for example, who pays attention to whom and how that might affect whether they can solve problems or not, and things like that.
Your breakthrough is? What have you broken through here?
Well, the breakthrough that I'll talk about this afternoon is related to that, that kind of framework, but specifically I'm looking at platforms, the new platform economy, and asking, like, what are platforms? Are they markets? Are they hierarchies? Are they networks? And I answer that they're none of those. They're something different.
Right, we'll come to that in just a second. I want to make sure, when David says later this afternoon, you're talking about elsewhere at Falling Walls, so check the program and, and you'll be able to see that.
Well, then that's what I'm talking about today, this morning.
Absolutely, so. No, but we're going to have a bit of a preview here. So, okay, so platforms. It sounds like you've opened up a can of worms here. What are these platforms? Perhaps let's dive a little bit deeper. It sounds very much like to me that you're talking about what people sort of euphemistically talk about collective intelligence, the way that people might make a decision not only based on their own position on that particular issue, but also on how they feel about other issues and how other people feel about those other issues and how that all sort of networks together and influences the one original position. Am I barking up the right tree here?
Well, we're talking about two different things now. One is about the markets, the cognition of markets and teams, and the other is about platforms. So continuing with that, it's not just what people think other people might think, and that is also interesting, this idea of a second-order observation. It's more like if I don't pay attention to you in my work setting, I will miss opportunities to make better decisions. Because cognition, my ability to solve a problem, is not just a property of what's in my head, it's also a property of my location in social space, in physical space. And that is what that work is about. Like, how you value something might depend on a sequence of things that you had recently evaluated. So so that's partly what that work is about.
Okay, but that is actually that's obviously relevant. But I mean, so if we talk about the platforms there, and we talk about, on the one hand, in real life experiences being there, what is your immediate, your locale? But the platforms are often spoken about as being virtual, but they actually are real, aren't they? So tell us how the platforms come into that and how they influence us, or how they influence your work.
Okay, so I wear several hats. Mm-hmm. One is I'm an economic sociologist, and I'm interested in what are the organizational forms in which people are participating. So economists and economic sociologists have thought about three possibilities. There's markets, there's hierarchies, and there's networks. But platforms, and I think here, the 7 largest publicly traded companies in the world are all the platform model. Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Alibaba, Tencent. These are, it used to be the petro giants, the dinosaurs, PetroChina and ExxonMobil, and now it's the platform. So what are these platforms? And whereas people on markets compete, and in hierarchies, somebody commands. Right. And in networks, these trust-based environments, people collaborate. And what platforms do is they co-opt. They take activities that are on the platform, but not in the firm, and they use them. The most valuable thing that happens on a platform is the generation of data. And we do that all the time for free for the platforms. Right. When we evaluate, when we post, when we like or not like, how quickly we click, all these are activities that are data generating. So my problem then is, if the most important value creating activities are happening on the platform, but not in the firm, how does the platform manage these activities? Does it supervise them directly? Does it command? That could be one alternative, an old model. And we find that it's not that. It's not any one of these kinds of traditional existing forms.
I just want to roll back a little bit, to break through some of the terminology.
Sure.
Dare I say it, a bit of the jargon. It's not really jargon, but so a platform, let's say, so a lot of us use, got to name it, Teams,
right.
Office, the Office platform. That's in a firm or an organization, correct? But it's a platform that is basically, it's servicing the firm, but at the same time has its own interests within that firm and externally. Is this sort of, this is what we're saying, and you're trying to work out how that interacts?
I'm trying to think about, how does Uber manage the problem that the value creating activity it doesn't directly supervise? I'll give you another example. Yeah. There's all kinds of platforms. You mentioned one, the platform that my office hires, I don't know, Microsoft 365 or whatever these things are. Okay, I'll give you a different kind of example. Agricultural equipment. Okay, so a tractor driver, my friend James, a Nebraska farmer, when he's on his tractor, he's planting seed, but he is also gathering data at the same time, because his tractor, John Deere tractor, has an onboard computer and a GPS guidance system. And while he plants seed and harvests corn, John Deere harvests data. And it doesn't do it by supervising him. It doesn't pay him anything. In fact, he pays John Deere he's in debt to lease his tractor from John Deere. But the most valuable thing that John Deere is getting is actually the data about soil conditions and crop yields. And they do it all without supervising them.
Okay, so is this a problem, or is this an observation? Is it a solution? What are we talking about in that sense?
It becomes a problem because, for example, with Facebook or Uber, to some degree Netflix and Spotify, but let's kind of keep Facebook and Uber. I need two hands. So if you understand now what I mean by platform, I mean like Facebook, Instagram, stuff that you post, you rate, you rank, all these kinds of things. Okay. At first glance, it seems flat, right? And if I had a ribbon and I stretched it out here, you would say that's flat, okay? Now, if I took this ribbon and I aligned it end to end, and you would say, oh, it's got an inside and it's got an outside.
Right.
But if I took that ribbon and I made one twist and then I attached it back together, I would have what's called a Mobius strip. And a Mobius strip has no inside or outside.
Yeah.
And the platforms have no inside and outside. They're not taking, everything's happening on the platform, not in the firm. But it's valuable for the firm. Now, where it becomes a problem, I'm going to take the metaphor just a little bit more. It's too bad I don't have two hands.
I could try. Are we allowed to do this COVID?
We do this. Let's try this. Let's try this. Okay. So imagine we have some feedback loops, and there's all these feedback loops, and this is what we look at, the feedback loops that are happening, and they seem to be circular. But in fact, they've got a twist. And because they're twisted, we end up what we have, and this is a diagram I could show you, a kind of three-dimensional Mobius space. Now, why that matters is because it allows the platforms to deny accountability. That's the problem. Okay, if we compete, we're on a market, then we make a contract, then I can hold you accountable to that contract. If we're in a bureaucratic hierarchy, people at the bottom make a mistake, well, somebody can be held accountable, even above them. Bureaucracy should that, they don't do it enough. If we're in a trust-based network, we can hold each other accountable. But how do we hold Facebook accountable? How do we hold Uber accountable? Because there's always denying and saying, "Oh, that didn't happen in the firm. No, that was out there. That was stuff we don't employ these people. We don't supervise them directly. They're all engaged in activities on their own." So that's when the problem comes in.
Right, we stand back and watch them change their name and hope that the problem goes away.
That's exactly right.
Now I'm going to risk turning to camera. A call out to you out there. Let me have a look at my watch. So we're probably about halfway through this conversation. It's time for you to raise your hands en masse, please. Otherwise, I should get very angry, and you don't want to see me when I turn green. So please ask questions, because this is fascinating. I mean, this is so. Where does this stand in relation to the other debate about platforms versus publishers? Because I mean, that's a legal issue, isn't it? But what we're also I presume you're talking about behaviour, aren't you? I mean, in sociology, social sciences, you're talking about how people behave and interact with a platform and how that interacts with them, right? So, what's the connection there?
Well, one of the examples would be, for example, here in Europe, it's interesting because European laws now are different than the United States. Google, for example, says we're not publishers. You know, the content that's posted, if you search, you're searching a database, and we never publish that. So if you say, well, you know, listen, something was told about me, and it's not true, actually, or perhaps it was true, but I paid my debt, and it's, you know, long ago in the past, and you say, you know, I'd like people not to be able to find that when they search. And Google says, you know, we're not a publisher. We don't vet any of this data. If it's out there, it's out there. And in the United States, they were able to, because of these twisted loops, it didn't happen inside Google. No. You know, there's nothing that says Google. But European law now is ahead of the United States, especially with regard to the platforms. For example, around Uber as well.
Okay, we have a question. So,
very good.
If you'd like to state your question, if you'd like to then say your first name, that'd be good. Otherwise, I'd sort of like advise against, unless you'd like to name your full name, then please do. But welcome to this Falling Walls Breakthrough Conversation. Please ask your question to David.
Thank you very much. It is very interesting listening to your conversation. My name is Saskia, And my question is, what do you think is the most important challenge for our society, having these platforms or dealing with them in our all-day life?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. I think I would restate what I said before. The problem is, how do we make them accountable? How do we deal with the fact that, so the accountable one, I said, okay, that is an important one. The other one is that, when I talked about the kind of circularity of ratings and rankings that are happening inside on the platform, in a kind of three-sided relationship, the platform operator, the provider, and the consumer. Right now, that's not balanced. It's definitely weighted in favor of the platform and the consumer, and the providers are on the kind of losing end of this proposition. Partly because we're in a situation in which many of these platforms have been subsidized by their investors, who are realizing that if they can get a monopoly or near monopoly situation in a winner-take-all market, they stand to make enormous gains. And so they're willing to take losses temporarily that favor the consumer. And that makes for alliances politically between the platform operators and the consumers at the political level. So imagine, yeah.
No, but sorry, I mean, it's very interesting, but it also feels like they're being subsidized by a lack of knowledge and awareness. I mean, there was, with the most recent, was it a Senate inquiry in the States, people said that one of the main things they said was that, how well informed they were compared to the last Senate inquiry in the States. I mean, we don't get it. Should these platforms be broken up? I mean, it feels very much like you've got a breakthrough here, but actually there's still a way to go, to more walls to break through, because actually we're not there, aren't we? There's no equity in these platforms, right? Vis-a-vis the people off whom they're profiting.
Mm-hmm. That's right. There's not another question, so I'm going to I'll take Saskia again. I'll back up a little bit more, just a higher level of generality. I think what's going on and what's related to this problem, which I've called algorithmic management, is that we're in a situation in our societies in which there's I'll call it a kind of class struggle that's going on. And I haven't mentioned this before, but at the turn of the 20th century, there was a new knowledge class that emerged. Professionals, expertise, managers. And it was kind of spearheaded an ideology to support this new manager class, new manager and professional class, by a mechanical engineer. His name was Frederick Winslow Taylor. Scientific management was what he called it. And that happened at the first 2 decades of the 20th century. The rise of that new knowledge class happened for this entire century. Now, there's another new knowledge class. It's also headed by engineers, but they're not mechanical engineers, they're software engineers. And we might think about these two kinds of classes as being in alliance. But in fact, I think that the software engineers, the artificial intelligence, the machine learning, might be posed to make an attack on expertise, an attack, in a way, on science. Because science is always about not just knowledge, but specialized knowledge. And the specialized knowledge of the software engineer is acontextual. It's not really specialized knowledge, or it's a specialized knowledge that says, we can go into any field, And we don't need expertise. We don't need to make judgments. We've got machine learning that's going to crank out predictions quite apart from judgment. And that's the fundamental challenge that faces our societies today.
Crikey. I mean, so I wish we'd got to that earlier, because I mean, that whole sort of, the whole issue of what people bandy around, artificial intelligence, machine learning, algorithms, you know, we're taking an awful lot of punts on basically what might be the reality in a sense, you know. And so what is the next breakthrough that you want to see now I think we've got about 2 minutes to go. What would you say?
I'm not sure.
Can one say that?
Breakthrough is the way I would think about it. I think about what are the challenges?
Yeah.
What are the challenges? The danger is that the new knowledge class of software engineers, that algorithmic management, aligns with populism. Okay, because it's actually anti-expertise. Populism is against science. It's against expertise. And I'm not saying that experts need to be unaware of the privilege that they enjoy and that they are an elite, and that is a real problem. But we need to be able to kind of not just act in a defensive way, but think about and make clear to society the importance of specialized knowledge. Now, I think the challenge is to be able to do that not in a non-elitist way that would be promoting the values of specialized knowledge and the values of democracy. And that's the opportunity that we face, because it's quite dangerous to think about an alliance of populism and machine learning.
I think that's quite fascinating. Nice that you call it an opportunity as well. I think that they're very fascinating listening to you raise these issues. I'm just trying to sort of like crystallize in my head. I think the sort of like, you know, we often talk about these platforms as being sort of conduits to a greater knowledge in society and all the rest of it, but we do create these incredibly concentrated bubbles, and what we need is sort of specialized bubbles that can interact with each other and to further not be against science and the adventure and discovery of new knowledge. David Stark, it's been fascinating talking to you. I think we're out of time if my watch is right. Thank you to you out there. David?
Thank you very much.
You've been great. Thank you very much. Stick around for the next Falling Walls Breakthrough conversation coming up in about 5 minutes.